All right, I'm really starting now. So the best forms are the simplest forms, and not because it's easy for you to make simpler forms, but it's easy for the user to fill out simpler forms. This is a really great form because it only has one field to fill out. You want to sign up for an email list, just supply your email address and you're signed up, that's it. As opposed to this form, with all these fields they're asking for. And when you really only need an email address to get emails, why do they need your name and other information and your gender and where you live and things like that? Even worse about this form is it doesn't work. So the best forms I'd have to say are forms that actually work. You want to make it as easy as possible for people to fill out forms because you want to get their information, you want them to sign up, you want them to buy things. This, for example, is a form to sign up for a software. And all you have to do to start out is fill out 2 fields. You need to supply your company name and your email address. And it's free, no credit card required, cancel anytime, and they make that really straightforward here by putting it right below this 2-field form because they want you to feel comfortable and easy about filling it out. You don't want it to feel, oh, if I give my credit card, is it going to be charged, and when does the free period end, and what if I forget? And that's kind of stressful, so they're making this as stress-free as possible. They do need more information. They ask for your name and password on the next screen, but by then you've already submitted the first form and you feel committed to it. Every question on a form has a cost. If you have too many questions, people don't want to fill out your form. If you have questions they don't want to answer or they can't answer, they won't fill out your form. Even if they do manage to complete your form, if it was a difficult process, that's lost goodwill. They're not going to feel as good about your company or your product. And on the other side, for you, the more questions you ask people that you don't need to, that's more data to clean up and maintain. Here's a form to sign up to listen to music on Spotify. So they ask for your username, password, email. That's all pretty standard. People are comfortable giving that. But why do they need my birthday if all I want to do is listen to music? Why do they need to know if I'm male or female? And the reason for that is marketing, obviously. They want as much information as possible because then they can market you correctly, they can sell your information for more money. So that's why they ask all these questions. But it's at the cost of possibly less people filling out the form and signing up. On the Facebook sign-up form, there's actually a link that you can click that explains why they need to get your birthday. And what it says, providing your birthday helps make sure you get the right Facebook experience for your age. If you want to change who sees this, go to the About section on your profile. And it's not actually entirely true. Really, they just want your age for marketing. They just want to not say that, and they want to be nice about it. The other thing on a lot of forms when they ask for your age, it's because there's a law in the United States that you can't collect information from people under the age of 13 without getting their parents' permission. So that's why a lot of things like Facebook or whatever, you have to be 13 to sign up. Sometimes forms ask questions that users can't answer. This is a site for British Columbia Tourism, and the form is to book a hotel. So you put in the dates you want the hotel room. Then after that, it asks what region you want to go to. Well, if you're going to a city in British Columbia and you're coming from, say, another country, you're somewhere far away, you know what city you want to go to. Do you actually know what region it's in? And I'm thinking a lot of the time, no, you don't. So you're going to have to try things and figure it out. And really, they're just doing this because it fits in their database to do the form this way, when it would be just as easy to just ask for the city, and they know what region the cities are in, just figure that out themselves. Why bother to ask the region? But, they're making the form to fit their database instead of making it to fit their users. So users don't like to answer questions, so you can get them to answer more questions by starting off slowly, and this is called gradual engagement. On this page to sign up for Twitter, they ask for your name, your phone number, email address, and your password. And then only on the next screen do they finally ask for your username, and that is because filling out a username on a site like this, it's actually pretty stressful because everybody's going to see your username. It's going to be right out there. You want it to be something good. There's not a lot of good usernames left on Twitter, so you actually have to think about it. So that's why they don't ask you that first, because you're going to get all stressed about it and then maybe not fill out the form. But by asking for it second, you've already committed by filling out the first part of the form. And then here even they say, don't worry, you can always change it later. So they're taking all the stress out of filling out this form. You don't have to be committed to your choices. And then only then on the confirmation message do they allow you to go on and make more settings and choose things. So keeping forms short, that's pretty important, which is why I want to start with it. But I know you're here to hear the technical stuff, so I'm going to move on to some of the more HTML and CSS things. So there's different types of form fields, and the text form field is the most common, and it used to be up until recently that was the only field you had to collect information other than checkboxes, radio buttons. And you can type anything you want in this text field. But now in HTML5, you have fields that look like this, where you can enter information, but they're more specific and give you more tools for helping the user put in the right information. For example, there's a date field now in HTML5. It used to be you'd have to use a whole lot of JavaScript to get a little drop-down calendar like this. But now it's built right into the browser. So all you have to do is specify this as a date field, and you get that little drop-down calendar option on the date field where the user can go through the calendar and pick their date. They can also type it in or use little up and down arrows to choose the month, day, and year. And it's not supported by quite all browsers. Some of the old ones don't, but most of them do. If you have a browser that doesn't support the new HTML5 fields, all that'll happen is it'll be a regular text field, and they still have to type something in. So it's important to think about that and still do server-side validation to make sure you're getting the correct information, even if on the client side in the browser, you're making them fill in a date or whatever it is. Even though it's much easier for the user to use the calendar, on this site, they put a drop-down list where you pick a date to buy a museum ticket, which is very difficult for the user to use. Without seeing that calendar, it's hard for them to pick their right date. They have to scroll through it. It's just more difficult. And you should avoid drop-down as much as possible when there's other alternatives that'll make it easy for the user to complete the information. There's also a month field, which is handy, such as for credit card expiration dates. And what you get on here, if you're filling out a month, you get a spinner on the mobile screen like you do on the full date. On the desktop, you can either type in just what month you want. You can scroll up and down to them, and then you can type in or scroll up and down to your year. But you can actually type anything you want for the year. So if you don't want something that's tens of thousands of years in the future, what you need to do is use minimum and maximum to specify what the user can fill in. And you can use this for any input field that's number-based, like date or number, and it's just min equals or max equals. So here we have a minimum of August 1st of this year, maximum of August 31st of this year. So if we only wanted to sell museum tickets for the next month, we can specify it that way. And then what you get in the date field, actually, since we already know it's sometime in August 2016, that's already filled in and grayed out, and all you change there is the date. The date format, by the way, is displayed according to what the user's device has for their country or region settings. So if they're in Europe or someplace where it's the day before the month, that's what they'll see on their screen. So you don't have to worry about that part at all. You also have an email input type. And on the desktop, this looks like a normal field, but it looks a little bit different on a mobile screen because you get a different keyboard, which has the @ and the period, allowing you to type that email address without having to go to a symbol screen. The other cool thing about the email field is the browser will validate it for you. So all you have to do is type, and when you hit submit, if it's not an email type of input, if you don't have the @ or you're doing it the wrong way, it'll give you an error message that's provided by the browser. This says, please include an @ in the email address. And again, some of these HTML5 input fields aren't supported in quite all browsers, so make sure you do server-side validation to just check and make sure it's what you want. The URL field, you also get a different keyboard on mobile that has the / and the .com. And then you have the number field, and this won't even let you type letters. You can just type the numbers, a period for a decimal, or the negative sign. You can do up and down. On the mobile, you get the number keyboard right away, so you don't have to switch to a different keyboard. So using all of these different input types is making it easier for the user to type in directly what they want without having to have extra clicks to get to the type of data that they need to type in. Going back to this museum form we looked at a minute ago, the next page after you choose your date from a drop-down is the number of tickets you want. They didn't use the number field here. They used some sort of just plain field where you can't type in it. You just have pluses and minuses to go up and down in each field as the number of tickets you want. If you're only getting a couple tickets, that's fine. But if you have a group of 30 people, you have to click that plus sign 30 times. You can't just type in 30, which is kind of really ridiculous to expect the user to do that. There's also a telephone field type where you get on the mobile, you get the phone keyboard, which is nice because they're bigger buttons, really quick to type in. You want to avoid drop-downs whenever possible because it does require that extra click. You have to click once to see the options and then click again to select the correct option. If you only need to choose from a short list of things, there's no reason to make the user do those extra clicks. But we see this on the web, a lot of drop-down menus like this with only a couple options. For example, like on an airline site where you're buying a ticket, there's a drop-down for round trip or one way. And they could easily do that with radio buttons instead, like this. So then it's only one click instead of two, which is really nice. The problem with radio buttons, although you can style them so that you can click anywhere on the word, a lot of people think you can only click inside that tiny little circle to select it. So this airline site made it even better by making it into big buttons you can choose for round trip or one way. What's pretty neat about this is those are actually radio buttons, even though they don't look like it. What they did is they styled it so the radio button is on top of the label, and then they made the actual radio button little circle thing disappear by giving it an opacity of 0.01, so you can't see it at all. So that's a pretty neat trick. So then what about really long drop-downs? If you're choosing the name of the city or place you're flying to, obviously you can't have buttons if there's hundreds of options. So what you can do is what's called type ahead, is you start typing and then you see the options that match what you've started typing. So this is pretty complicated to code by yourself, so you'd probably want to use some sort of plugin or library to get this functionality. Here's a really good one for searching for countries. And it's interesting the way they put this together. When you start typing, you get all the different options. They're not in alphabetical order. There's a lot of thought that goes into the order they're in. If you're typing 3 letters, if that starts the name of the country, that's going to be before ones where it's somewhere else inside of the word. Something that's really common, like the United States, is going to be at the top of the list. They allow for alternate spelling, such as if you type in America, it will actually choose the United States, even though it's a totally different word. It knows, that those are the same thing. If you download the slides later, there's actually a link on the bottom to an article that explains how they set this up, which is really interesting. Sometimes when you use a drop-down, you have no choice but to do a drop-down, and you get something like this. They made this really good attempt to put categories in there, except it's really hard to read, and you can't really see easily what the options are. And there's a better way to do this, and it's the opt group element. And you can see here, we have a list of pizza toppings. They're in a drop-down, but they're categorized: meat, veggies, and sauce. And you can see the bold headings above each section of pizza toppings. The code for this is fairly simple, but something not a lot of people necessarily know about. Inside your select element for the drop-down, you have all the options. When you have each group of options, just put the opt group element around it with the label of what the heading you want to be on, the heading that you want to have on the list. So that makes it a lot easier to go through a long list and figure out what the different things are on the list. Speaking of labels, form needs to have labels for each input so people know what to fill in. You need to associate the label element with the input element for screen readers so they know which label goes with each field on the form. You can do this 2 different ways. You can do it explicitly, and that's using the HTML to say how they're associated. So you see in the red, label 4 equals first name, and then the input ID equals first name. So they match, and then the screen reader knows they go together. You can also do it implicitly by putting the input inside of the label element. Doing it either of those ways, know that the screen reader will understand they go together. Sometimes you don't need to display a label. For example, if you have a search box on your site in a way like in the top right, it's really clear it's search, it has a little search icon next to it. You don't want to put the word search above or next to it. So instead, you can use aria-label equals search, and that will tell the screen readers that the label for that input is search. So it's kind of a way of adding a label that's hidden to everybody but the screen readers. Just as a note, don't do inputs that don't look like inputs, like this. Instead of boxes, you have lines. And people are going to figure out how this works. It looks kind of trendy, but it's going to take more cognitive energy for people to understand this and fill it out. And the harder it is to fill out a form, that's going to be, goodwill you're using from your users by not consciously, but subconsciously just making things difficult for them. You may have noticed in some forms you have gray text in fields rather than labels outside of the fields. This is called placeholder text. And it's done as an attribute to the input element. It puts gray text in the field, but it goes away when you're typing in the field. Nearly every browser supports this, except for older versions of IE, Opera Mini, and some very old browser versions. Some sites use placeholder text as labels, so screen readers can't read it. And some screen readers can't see this when the placeholder's in the field like that. So in this case, they only have the placeholders, no labels, but they do use area label to add labels for screen readers on each field. The only problem with this is once you start typing in the field, you can no longer see the label. So if you click to field and start typing and then you're unsure about what exactly they wanted, you have to delete what you typed to see the label again. Or once you've filled out a whole form, if you want to go back and check your work, you can't because all the labels are gone. Another problem is if somebody has autofill in their browser. If they start typing, what the browser does, it's saved the different things they commonly fill in forms, and it fills it out here automatically. But autofill isn't 100% perfect. It just guesses sometimes. But now it's filled in your whole form. You can't see the labels, and you don't know if it did it right. So in this case, they have placeholders, but they're using JavaScript once you start typing to leave the label inside of the field like that. It's sort of okay that way, but it's a problem that they're giving me error messages as I'm typing, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. On the desktop, that showed you the labels as you type, but on mobile, it doesn't. You just start typing and the labels disappear. Another problem with placeholder text is by default, it's not dark enough to meet accessibility standards for contrast. But if you make it look darker, people are going to think it's actual text in the field. It's not going to look like a placeholder anymore. This is a good example of using placeholder text. It's not in every field. It's only in the ones where you might need additional instructions. The code for doing placeholder text in CSS, if you want to style it, is this. It has vendor prefixes, but the syntax is really weird, so you're going to have to look up how to do it. It's not just placeholder for all of them. So in this case, the labels and placeholders give instruction, but sometimes you need more instruction, like when you have a password field where people need to create a password. It's different on every site, so you have to let people know what they're required. And you can see it here on the bottom. It lists the different things you need to do for your password. The other thing is you can show and hide the password. There's a little button to do that. So they've done usability studies and found it's actually better to show people the password as they're typing. Less mistakes. It won't take them as long to fill out forms. But if you do that, unfortunately, people think your form isn't secure. So it's always best to hide it by default, but give people the option to see the password also. Because you've all had that. You start typing a password and you think maybe you hit the wrong letter, but you're not sure, so you have to delete the whole thing and start over just to make sure you didn't screw it up. Because you don't want to create a new password and find out that you created not what you thought you created, because then you don't know what it was. On this site, so I tried to enter a password to meet their rules. I didn't know their rules because they didn't tell me, and I only got the error message after the fact. Why couldn't they tell me ahead of time what the rules were? On this site, it looks like you can't see instructions for password, but once you tab to the field, then it does show you the password instructions. On another site, this is pretty common now. Instead of telling you rules, it just says how strong your password is, and you have to get it strong enough so pass their test. For many people, this is fine. To add letters or add symbols, make it longer. But for some inexperienced internet users, they're going to go, oh, my password's not strong enough, and they'll just start over and type a new word or type something different and not realize what they need to do to make it stronger. So it's better to be more specific about this, saying you can make your password stronger by adding symbols, adding numbers, making it longer. And then there's inline validation. So it's great that we can now validate inline in the browser before we submit, but you don't want to do it like this before a user completes the field. If I just start typing my email address, of course it's not valid yet. I just started typing it. So it feels like I'm being scolded here. It's really not very nice. So this also creates usability problems because the user is going to stop to read all these messages, and it's going to take longer for them to fill out their form. The only time the instant validation as you're typing is useful in something like a username field. Because say I want to have my first name as my username, well, it's taken. My first and last name, already taken. And I just keep adding things until I find something that's valid. For username, if you had to just type something, hit submit over and over again, that would take a lot longer. But then they do the same thing for the email address, checking as you go along. And again, I'm being scolded because I haven't put the right thing in when I'm not even finished typing it. For accessibility, one thing you want to think about is, does the user need to see the message right away? And just like it bothered me when I got the email, your email is invalid each time I typed a letter before I was done, think about if you had a screen reader and every single time you typed a letter, it told you your email address was invalid. That would really be a pain, right? So what you can do is assign it a value of area-live equals polite, which says the screen reader shouldn't read the message until after the user stopped typing. Or if it's a type of message they need to see immediately, if you give it a value of an assertive, it'll always show the error message immediately. This site does a pretty good job of showing error messages. It does all of them after you click submit, although it does the client side, and you can see them very clearly on the page. It tells you exactly what you need to do to fix each one, and it's very visible. You can use these pseudo selectors to style input fields, so it'll automatically be able to tell which are valid, invalid, if you have something in the client side that's checking for that. You also want to make sure to let the user know what fields are required. You could let the browser know by using the required attribute right there, which works on the client side. For screen readers, they don't all recognize the required attributes, so it's best to always use aria-required equals true in there just as a backup, just in case. So here, if I submit an empty field, it's going to say to me, please fill out this field. And this is happening all in the browser. You don't have to add the error message. It's all done for you ahead of time. You need to make it clear which fields to fill out, though. The instruction here, it's kind of hidden off to the side at the top, and then it's hard to see which fields are required. If most are required, it's better to mark which fields are optional. In this case, they say at the top, all questions must be answered unless marked optional. Then they have a few at the bottom that are marked optional. Here they say at the top, please complete all fields in this form. Good instruction, but then they have red asterisks next to every single field. This just adds visual noise. It's stressful to the user. Again, it's better to mark the ones that are optional if most of them are required. There's also this assumption that everybody who uses the web understands what the asterisk symbol means. But it turns out they've done usability studies, and some people don't. So just putting the asterisk symbol next to things doesn't mean people are going to know what's going on. There's no instructions here. This site does two things wrong. They put at the bottom the instructions. It says the fields that are required are in red. And the second bad thing that they do, besides putting the instructions after the form, is it's in red, where colorblind people can't necessarily see that. So if you're using color, you always want to use another method in addition to make sure colorblind people know what you're referring to. If you've ever filled out paper forms, you've noticed that it doesn't say which fields are required. It's just the expectation everything is required. And it's the same thing on some web forms. If it just makes sense, you don't have to mark which fields are required. Obviously, you're filling this out. It's asking for your name and your email address. You're going to fill all this out as a user because it just seems like you should have to fill it all out. If you're filling out a form to get airplane tickets, it's going to ask for your date, how many people, what city you're going to. You're just going to fill all this out because it feels like you're supposed to. You don't need to tell the user that. If you do want to mark required fields, you can do it in CSS, either do input and then required in square brackets, or input : required, and either of those will allow you to style the required fields differently than the other fields. The last thing I wanted to bring up is a problem that comes up on forms pretty often, is the gender field. It's a problem because often they just give you a choice of male or female, but not everybody fits into those two options. First question you should ask yourself, why do I need to know the gender of my users? You don't necessarily. A lot of time you do because of this. You're going to be sending them emails and you want to know how to address them. And you feel like if you know their gender, you can know what to call them. But it turns out not everybody's Mr., Mrs., or Ms. There's doctors and all sorts of other titles. If you're in England, you have Baron and Baroness. I don't think we have many of those over here. This is a long list, but there's really far more options. So the best thing, just avoid title, avoid gender, and just call people by their names. It's a lot simpler, and you don't need to know the gender. But a reason where you might need to know gender is on social networking sites, because you want to have gender on your profile, or you might be referring to users in the third person and need to know which pronouns to use. Facebook handles this fairly well. It does now, it didn't used to, but they changed this a couple years ago. They have a drop-down for gender, but you can choose female, male, or custom. If you choose custom, you get a box where you can fill something in. You actually get to choose from about 60 options or so, one of which is other. In addition, on the bottom, they ask which pronoun you want to use, but only if you chose custom for the gender. So there's a lot of choices here that allows you to customize your gender if you don't feel like you fit into into male or female. They're also very specific about where they use the pronoun and where gender is visible on the site. You can say only your friends can see your gender. So that might be more comfortable for somebody who's not open about what gender they identify as. The only problem is Facebook sign up only gives you 2 options. And the reason they do this and they don't give you all the extra options starting out is they want to know that male or female so they can put you in the right marketing category. So it's true. And once they have that, they don't care what you call yourself later. They need to know if you're male or female, which is kind of unfortunate, but they do give you that option later, so at least there's something there. The other time where you might need to know gender is if you are in a medical context. I work in medical software, and it's important to know the sex of the user, which is sex is different than gender. Sex refers to anatomy. Gender refers to what somebody identifies as. So it's not a binary answer either, and we have to do a lot of work to make sure we're handling that correctly and respectfully. So I covered a lot of stuff today, but it's far from everything there is to know about forms. Hopefully you have a better idea of how important forms are to creating a good user experience. And next time you create a form, you'll put more thought into the details so it works better for your users. Thank you.